Hello and welcome to another episode of Bottom Up, the open source culture club. And today I'm very excited because, first of all, this is the first episode of the second season, and this is the very first English episode. And I'm honored to have a very special guest today, which is Erik Jacobs. Erik Jacobs is Senior Manager Tech Marketing in the Hybrid Platforms Business Unit at Red Hat. And what it exactly means and what this job is all about and the role is all about, this is something we will ask him right away. He's also a Chairman's Award winner, which is really amazing. A great achievement, which was this year, I think, Erik, right?
Yeah.
And you're also kind of referred to as Mr. AIML. So I probably ask you also some questions on this. But yeah, let's start with your actual job role.
Sure.
For the audience out there, what can I imagine under this senior manager in the Hybrid Platforms Business Unit?
Yeah, so we'll kind of start removing useless words, right? So senior, not an important word. Manager, nobody cares, right? Hybrid Platforms doesn't mean anything outside Red Hat. Technical marketing. Okay, now we have something meaningful. Marketing, it's not really so much marketing, right? What do we do? So the way that I generally describe the role of technical marketing at Red Hat is we create content and assets that the sales engineers use when they go to do their job with the customer. Now, granted, in a digital world, a lot of that stuff is just available self-service, right? It's blog posts on our website, it's live streams and other things. So there's not always like an account team involved, but generally speaking, we're creating technical proof materials that the customers are going to ultimately consume. We make sure that the field, our sales engineers and our consultants and whoever, that they understand these materials, and we work very closely with the internal enablement organizations to help with training and all of these other things. And then like many organizations have, you could think of us kind of in a developer relations or DevRel kind of role, maybe evangelist, if that suits your, if that word makes more sense to you. So, sometimes we go to conferences. I have my first conference talk got accepted this year for KubeCon Detroit, so I'm excited about that.
Nice.
And those kinds of things, right? So that's the technical marketing job. And really, for me as a manager, we're all kind of player coaches on the management team here, at least in our little group. So as you mentioned, AIML, that's one of the areas that I focus on, and trying to make sure that I understand and can tell the story about what our capabilities are in that space, specifically as it relates to the container platform, right, to OpenShift container platform. And most of the management stuff, it's typical people management, right? So I have a team of 4 right now, soon to be 5. Well, it was 5. Then we had somebody leave because they had a great opportunity, and we were happy to see them, keep growing and moving. We're going to backfill them soon. So anyway, small team of people who do similar things, and they all have their own specialties, right? So, yeah.
Okay, nice. As you are a manager, how would you describe is management different at Red Hat compared to other companies?
So this is my first job managing people, so I don't really have a comparison to like how other companies do it. And in a weird way,
but you had managers before, right?
Well, so I was about to say I've been at Red Hat 14 years, which in the tech industry is like forever, right? Like nobody.
You're a dinosaur.
Yeah, I'm a dinosaur. Yeah. And so my only other job before this, I worked for a very small mom and pop style company with 6 or 7 employees. We made control systems that were used in kind of the TV industry. So the example I like to give is so in a normal like IT environment, you have NOC, right? Network Operations Control, and they're looking at switches and routers and all that other stuff. Well, in the TV world, you have the RF signals that go up and down from the satellites. They go out over cables and fiber and other things. they have TOC, Transmissions Operations Control. So the company I worked for, they made control systems that were like management tools to help talk to all the equipment. I was an implementation engineer. But like I said, it was a really small shop. For the longest time, my manager was like the owner of the company. Okay. And then they hired like an operations manager guy. He and I didn't get along, and that's ultimately why I left the company. But, that's another story. So I don't have a good comparison in terms of like, how is Red Hat management different? I can say from what I don't think the pure people management aspect is necessarily that much different, right? Mm-hmm. Most of us as managers, we've got employees who are kind of resources. They have to do things. We've got expectations from the business that are put on us. We try to figure out how to move our chess pieces, our utilities around to achieve the desired goals for the company, right? So it's been an interesting journey for me. Maybe what's different at Red Hat than some other organizations, we actually have a lot of internal training for people management. We have a course that's like, what is it like to be a manager at Red Hat? And then we have other like more general sort of people management-y courses, right? Like how do you have hard conversations with people, and those kinds of things. So I don't know if other organizations provide that much access to that kind of training stuff for people managers in general. So maybe that's different, but again, I don't have any other experience to draw from. So.
What I know personally is that in a lot of other companies, it is like decisions are made top down, right? So there's a manager, there is an objective, a goal, and you break it down, you split it up to the teams, and I think this is also kind of different at Red Hat somehow. I mean, there's both, right? So there's a lot coming really from engineers, from consulting, from people out of the field, and you can actually, do a lot, have a lot of impact compared to, let's say, other
I mean, open source in general is very different than traditional proprietary software, or even like a company that just makes stuff. Not necessarily like they're not producing software for others to download and use or whatever, like I don't know, Expedia, random company, right? Like they make software, but it's just a user interface and APIs and things that external people consume, right? But their stuff is closed. Maybe it is. Their stuff is closed source, right? So it's not out. Their source code is not out in the public. So that's sort of a difference, and the way that Red Hat does business, because we've got these communities, and we're not always like the only people that make decisions in the community. And so it's got to be interesting to be an engineering manager at Red Hat, because the people that report to you are working in these communities where like their decisions may get overruled. I don't even know. Like I can't begin to think. We should have an engineering manager come on your show, because that would probably be an interesting conversation, right? Like, what is it like to manage people who work in open source? At the engineering, like people who are writing code level. Yeah. For us in tech marketing, like we have some high level objectives, like, well, we should write like some blog posts, and we should do some streams and make some like sample solutions and other things. But when we go into planning, it's kind of like we do it as a group. And not necessarily a tiny group of just the management, but like we kind of do it as a group of our business group. But it's not like hard and fast rules. It's not like, oh, well, you didn't make your 5th blog post, you're fired, like, or whatever, right? It's much more fluid than that, because we try to be responsive to the needs of the business, right? And we do a lot of customer interaction too, right? We're seen in some cases as the most expert on the subject at the company. Right, so it's like, we potentially sit up here, maybe the consultants and architects, are kind of up there, and then we have some specialists, and then just general population of salespeople, and then whatever. And so sometimes, things filter up to us. So we do all these things, and it's hard to like come up with clear. Sometimes you hear the term MBO, management by objective, and it's like we try not to do that, right? Like, we want people to be flexible with what they do. We want them to be self-empowered to make good choices, but like with most places, a lot of that flexibility comes with seniority. So if you demonstrate over time that you make great choices, like, hands off, like you're doing good work. If you seem aimless or need more assistance or whatever, like, I'm going to tell you some things I think you should do. one of the big differences between being an individual contributor and being a manager is, you don't want to tell people how to do it, or more specifically, like what you want them to do. You want to give them some flexibility to make it their own, right? Because otherwise, you're kind of a micromanager. Like if you're nitpicking every word, every line of code, whatever, it can be frustrating for the other person.
What is the most important thing when you hire someone? What are you especially looking for? Is it attitude?
We have been a little bit. What we have traditionally looked for in this group is two different things. One, we generally look for what we kind of make sports analogies, right? Like we're looking for all-around athletes, right? Pick your favorite sport, whether it's football for the Europeans or football for the Americans or soccer for the Americans, whatever, like baseball, who cares? Pick your sport, there's all these different positions, and, we try to pick people that can play all the positions, right? Like we don't necessarily just want this defender or this catcher, pitcher, whatever. We want somebody who can do as much as possible, because the needs are constantly changing. We're not yet at a point where we need people who are like really specifically like, you're just a technical writer and you're only ever going to write blog posts. Like we don't do that. And then the other thing that we do, or that I've tried to do, is I look for cultural fit, because I can teach skills. Like it's pretty obvious when a person has either a strong educational background or they've got a great work history or whatever it is, like, whether you have a degree or not, if you have a resume that shows that you can learn and adapt and change and you have a wide set of skills, it's like, okay, great. But what do you do in your free time? And the example that I give is, if I was interviewing you or for the team, and I was like, hey, what do you do in your free time? And I'm not saying there's anything bad with this, right? I'm just telling you what I'm looking for. And if you said that all you did was sit at home, in your free time, and you just read fantasy novels, right? Lord of the Rings, Bryan Sanderson, whatever, all these different things. Those are not related. I know that Bryan Sanderson did not write Lord of the Rings. Anyway, so, if that's all you said you did, and I explored it a little bit, and you weren't very technical, in your hobbies and your interests, like if the thing that excited you about the fantasy novels was not like the world building and the technical, or like how magic worked and whatever it was, right? You're not a fit for this team. Everybody on this team is what I'll call like a super nerd, right? Like in our hobbies, we do nerdy things. You look in the background, like I've got this sim racing rig set up, like, I write code here and there. I'm really into coffee, and like I make water. It's all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Everybody on the team's kind of got some nerdy thing that they do. We're all just like super technical people by nature, which tells me that you're going to work fine on the team, because what we need is people who like to get in and get nerdy and tinker and do weird things and figure stuff out. So if I have a choice between like the obsessive tinkerer and the sort of like, when I'm not working, and I'm just sort of staring at the walls, I'm going to go for the tinkerer every time.
Okay, interesting. When talking about skills, just one question. Is there a skill you would like to have? If you could wish something, what would it be?
So, it's funny, like my focus area right now is AI/ML, but I don't know anything about statistics other than like really, really basic stuff. I took a data science course, but it didn't really teach me data science. Okay. If there was one skill I wanted, it would be to know more about the actual practitioning doing of data science. Like I know about the technical capabilities and I can talk about high level stuff, but I can't tell you the difference between a neural network and a whatever, something else, right? So if for what I'm doing right now, like that would be a skill that I would like to have.
Oh, okay, nice.
There are many skills I would like to have, but that's one.
Okay. When was your very first contact with open source?
I guess the first real thing that I could point to definitively was I was doing some internet e-commerce-y stuff not that long after college, and we were using Red Hat Linux back then. So that would have been, I think it was Red Hat Linux. Whatever version of Red Hat Linux was right before they switched to ES. And then just over the years, like I went to that control systems company after that, and that was QNX, so not really much in the way of open source. Yeah, and then I came to Red Hat, and so really that was like boom, now you're really in sort of now you're really in open source land, yeah.
And what does open source mean for you today?
Open source is more than just putting your code on GitHub, right? Like there has to be community. You want not just the code, but an actual community or responsiveness and interaction, right? Even if it's a one-person project, being responsive to RFEs, being responsive to the your users and everything. Like oftentimes, an open source project is started because somebody wants to scratch their own itch, right? Oh, like I've got this problem. I think if I wrote like a little bit of code, I could fix this problem. And then it becomes a thing that lots of people like and lots of people use. But usually, if people are super stubborn or not receptive to their users or whatever, nobody really adopts that kind of thing. So a lot of the power in open source comes from community. I think in general, Red Hat does a good job of not just picking technology, but picking communities, right? Picking things that we think are going to have a backing or helping to build community around whatever the thing is. It's part of the reason we chose Kubernetes back in the day, because OpenShift was not always based on Kubernetes. At one point, we had our own implementation of kind of containerization technology and how to do build with software and kind of in a way GitOps and all these other things. A, it was very early, and B, it was really we were the only ones doing it. And then along came this Kubernetes thing, and we were like, okay, well, it's got a lot of backing from other people. It looks like it's got some bones to it. Let's make a bet on this. And then that turned out to be a good bet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there what is for you currently the most interesting open source project? Is it still Kubernetes, or is there anything else you're really fascinated about?
From a things that I do day to day perspective, right? So AI is one thing, but the other area of focus for me is gaming and interactive entertainment. So open source things that are interesting to me are like the Open 3D engine. So Amazon had bought the company behind the Crysis video game, and that was they had built their own game engine, Crytek, that company. Amazon turned that into the Lumberyard engine, which they supported for a while, and it was source available. So you could see the source code. I can't remember if you could file issues on GitHub or not, but you couldn't make changes, you couldn't fork it. Like they didn't care who you were if you were outside their four walls. And then they decided, hey, we want to build more of a community around this thing. So Amazon donated that code base to the Linux Foundation and started the Open 3D Foundation, and now we have the Open 3D engine. So to me, that's a really exciting project because it's really truly trying to be a 3D engine, not a gaming engine. So it does a lot of great stuff for gaming, but it has a lot of other uses, right? Simulation, physics stuff, just general rendering, video effects, all kinds of other things, right? So it's a cool project that Red Hat's involved in that I'm paying attention to. And then, of course, you've got, one of the major open source other gaming engines, Godot. So Red Hat and some of the gaming folks were doing a project based on Godot. So that's interesting to me. I'm learning C# in a way and doing some of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that are personally interesting to me. And interestingly, I talked about the sim racing rig a little bit earlier. So there is a game that I play or a sim that I use called R-Factor 2. And a bunch of us, I'm in a league, a bunch of us were using some of these like dashboard overlay solutions to see what's going on with the car while you're driving. And then some guy came out with a different one. It was like super lightweight, but it was open source. Like it was on GitHub and it was written in Python. And being a stupid American, I only understand freedom units, right? So Fahrenheit, pounds per square inch, like those kinds of dumb things. And I was like, oh man, this thing doesn't use freedom units. Wait, it's just Python? I think I can fix this. And so legit, like we had a night where like the game server that we used had crashed or wasn't cooperating or whatever. And so I'm sitting there like hacking on Python code, trying to like make this thing take freedom units, show freedom units, and I submitted a pull request. And I was like, yeah. And then the guy actually took the pull request and accepted it almost verbatim. And then I had put it in RFE, and I was like, oh, hey, like it doesn't show the time left in the session. It'd be really great, like, Would that be okay if we did that? I'll try to find time to code it. And he said, oh yeah, sure, no problem, that'd be great. And then he ended up doing it anyway. So, it's like, it was really cool to see this thing start from almost nothing.
Yeah.
And then because of community, in a very short period of time, like a bunch of stuff happened. He was more motivated because he had users. And then we were motivated because he was doing the things that we needed, and he was receptive to feedback and code contributions and other stuff. So like, that was cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, it shows pretty much how open source works and what the power is, and also that it's really a good source for innovation, because a lot of people, a lot of different minds, thinking about the same problem and trying to find the best solution some way, right? So,
well, and it's in a weird way, it's not just open source. It's not just an open source story. It's a story about openness in general, because the reason that this person was able to write this little display overlay was because rFactor 2 as a simulator makes a bunch of the data about the simulation available via a shared memory plugin. So they opened this source of data from this game, from this simulator, and now because that data is openly available, people can create all kinds of cool stuff from it. So this person chose to create cool visualizations, and then that created a whole community of things. So, open source, yes, okay, the source code is available, but there's openness, and then there's open source. And even just being more open as an organization can provide dramatic benefits, right? We see this with governments now. Like a lot of governments are making data sets available, and then users, communities are creating interesting solutions around these open APIs or open data sets. The source code isn't necessarily available. Like the government's website source code isn't in GitHub, but they have an open API that tells you how to interact with the data, and they allow you to do whatever you want with it. So you don't always have to make your source code available to participate in open culture.
Really interesting, yeah, definitely. In terms of culture also, I think at Red Hat there is a very special culture, right? What is this cultural aspect that kind of ties everything together? What is the common thing? And the second thing, very interesting, I would say, is how do you sustain such a great open culture?
Yeah, it's funny. There's so much discussion about corporate culture in general these days. You hear a lot about negativity, probably more in the media with respect to corporate culture, right? Like toxicity, sexism, racism, discrimination, whatever. And the other thing you hear about is like, oh, well, we acquired another company and they had an amazing culture, and then that culture just died because our culture took it over, or vice versa, right, or whatever. So culture can be really, really, really important for a lot of different things, and I would 100% agree with you. Red Hat has a very, very special and weird and unique kind of funky culture. The joke that I would tell people for years is Red Hat's the kind of place where you can get on that big mailing list that everybody's subscribed to and cuss out the CEO, as long as you're very explicit about why you're cussing them out and what your reasoning is and blah, blah, blah. And so it's kind of a joke because you probably can't straight up just cuss out the CEO. But you could, you can disagree vehemently and vociferously if you're well reasoned, and that is respected here, right? And that comes from, I think, open source, where in open source communities, it's the best ideas that percolate to the top, right? You've got this software solution, you've got two engineers that have differing ideas for how they want to do it. They kind of battle it out, via chat or whatever, and ultimately they choose the community chooses the best solution. And in a weird way, Red Hat's culture tends to operate that way. Now, that can have its own challenges in terms of sometimes it takes us a little longer to get something done because there's this all this sort of jostling for position and shuffling, and you end up sometimes maybe doing duplicate work because you've got two different groups that both see a problem and they're like, oh, well, we're going to solve this problem. Then they both solve the problem, and then sort of neither solution gets adopted. Yeah. So we have those problems, but I think that happens at a lot of companies. But again, I think the special culture part comes from this from openness and open source and sort of like you've got to prove your reasoning for why you do things. That doesn't mean you get to be disrespectful, right? Like people still are, I don't want to use the term punished, but like, you can't just run around being very disrespectful, whether that's, racist, bigoted, just rude, whatever. Like there's an expectation of decorum, and politeness, but, just because somebody's your superior doesn't mean that you can't disagree or that you just like, we're not a culture of blindly following orders, right? You get asked to do something or you don't even often get asked to do something. You're like, we have to achieve this thing. Like, I'm handing this to you to get us there. And usually it's up to that person to figure out how to do it. Now, sometimes they'll come and they'll say, like with my people, right? Like, hey, so-and-so, I need you to do this thing. And they'll be like, oh, well, I'm not really sure how to do that. Like, okay, well, here's 4 ideas. Like, go figure something out. Come back to me with what you think, It's like we're that kind of place. It's very much not, and again, I can't speak to engineering because that may not be the case over there. But we're not like a widget factory, right? Like we're not little automatons, and it's like, okay, this is your job, and you're going to take this thing, and you're going to put it here, and then you're going to take the other thing, and then you press the button, and that's your job. Like we're not really like that.
What was your funniest, most exciting, weirdest experience at Red Hat? Is there this one moment you'll never forget?
Yes,
Okay.
Absolutely. So it's a horrible, goofy travel story.
Oh.
Yeah. It's totally like safe for work kind of for travel for everybody travel story. So I was in Hong Kong. Nope, I was in China in Shenzhen, traveling to Hong Kong. And for those who may be unfamiliar with the geography and stuff there, they're right next to each other. Shenzhen is a city on the edge of China. Hong Kong is right across. And there's a number of places you can cross the border. And so I'm going to tell the short version of this story, which is basically when I had gone through the last time, I went through in a private car, and we had a driver, and that person held on to our luggage, and we went through the customs and border control with our passports, and then came to this person on the other side, and off we went. This other time I went through, it was like there were supposed to be taxis, there weren't taxis. The people had accidentally dropped us at the wrong border crossing, so we actually had to do something different. I was like, okay, we can leave our bags here on this bus. We actually couldn't leave our bags on the bus. That bus disappeared with our bags. So basically it's like, I don't know where our luggage is. I don't speak Chinese. I'm like calling local friends, coworkers to try and figure out like where did our bags go? And then on top of all this, a typhoon was coming. So Hong Kong is basically trying to shut down, and like literally they're putting boards in the windows in places. And so we end up, we had to take a bus to not what was the end of the route that evening. And I didn't have the right money. So I had like Chinese yuan, and they wanted Hong Kong dollars, and I was trying to negotiate with a taxi guy at some point, all kinds of crazy stuff. So in the end, we take the bus to this like random, like grungy kind of scary underpass. Like that's where the bus drops us off. There's a little shack with an old man. It's like got a little hangy light bulb, and there's all this luggage. And I see my bag, and I'm with another guy, and he sees his bag, and so we walk over, and the guy, this old Chinese man who doesn't speak any English, comes out, and he's got remember like the marble notebook from when you were in school, the black and white or whatever. He's got a notebook like this, right? So he opens it up and he holds it out, and he starts tapping on it, and he goes, "Passport number here." And I look at this thing, and it's just 2 columns, passport numbers and signatures. I have no idea what this book is for or why we're being asked to do this, but he was very insistent that we write down our passport numbers and then sign. This is like old British legacy, that's what we've done for 100 years, so that's what we'll continue to do. So I signed my passport number and signature in some random book somewhere in Hong Kong and took my suitcase and then went to my boarded up hotel. And so I will forever remember this travel story to the end of my days because it's so completely ridiculous.
Nice.
That's the short version.
Okay. Okay. if we have a little bit more time, I'm very interested in the long version as
Okay.
well. Nice. Okay, cool. Erik, is there anything you would like to improve at Red Hat?
Yeah, and it's something I can talk about, publicly and freely because it's something I'm actually working on right now, which brings us back to games and entertainment. So, myself and like Ruth Suil and several others at Red Hat, we're very vocal and adamant about needing to increase our participation in the games and entertainment industry, right? So if you think about all this multiplayer games that are out there, they're huge consumers of cloud resources. And they would make great customers for Red Hat, and we don't have a lot of references in that space today. And so when we had this sort of opportunity to be involved in the Open3D Foundation and the Open3D engine, I pushed very hard for that. And so what I would like to see is for us to be more involved in sort of this community of users because, like I said, they are tremendous consumers they consume a lot of open source, but they don't do a lot of open source, right? So there's certainly very few open source games, but if you look at Fortnite or like Minecraft, well, I guess Minecraft technically is open source-ish, and many of these other big multiplayer games, like they use a lot of open source. They run things on Linux and they run things maybe on Kubernetes, and they're consuming all these things. So it'd be great to develop deeper relationships with these companies and Red Hat, right? So that's what I would change is what I am changing, which is trying to focus more in this industry.
Okay, cool. Now, okay, that brings me also to more personal questions. Are you a gamer?
I vacillate back and forth between gaming and not. So, I've had a bunch of side projects over the years in, software, technology. I was trying to, motorsports is like one of my primary hobbies, right? So racing cars, playing with cars, working on cars. And so I've tried to what really gets me excited when I close my work notebook is like trying to smash together all of my interests. Like, oh, can I do some cool electronics thing that I could sell as a product related to race car stuff that's new or unique or different? Oh, can I do some like simple coding thing that's related to something that's interesting, whatever. So I've spent many years trying to do those things. But yeah, I still am a gamer and I like to play games. Actually, right now, I'm really deep in Railway Empire, which is basically, if for those who have played the old games like Sid Meier's Railroads or Railroad Tycoon, it's very much like that, right? Like you build your tracks and your stations, and you move goods between the places and move passengers.
You can spend hours and hours.
So the game was available in a bundle with all of the expansions, and I bought it not that long ago, and I'm already like 15 hours in. Just whatever. And so like I was talking to my girlfriend and the other day, just recently this week, I was trying one of the scenarios and I failed the scenario, and it was like I'm watching the train with the last like 5 things it needs to get to the place, and it has to do it by the end of the year. And so it's like December 20th, December 24th, December 29th, whatever, and it's like 2 feet from the station and the train breaks down. And then I lost, and I was like, damn. And so then I sort of like, I'm trying to go to bed, and I'm laying there in bed, and I'm thinking about this stupid game, like, what could I have done differently to like make it happen faster? Oh, I've got a new idea, strategy, right? Obsessive tinkering. I've got a different strategy for how I'm going to try this. And so I went back to the game the next day, and I was like, all right, let me try this. And of course, my girlfriend's like, that doesn't sound like fun at all. And I'm like, yeah, but it's like a puzzle. Like she likes Wordle. Right, the word game with the 5 letters or whatever. I like moving train tracks around. So.
Okay, cool. So you like cars, right? So what is your favorite car?
What is my favorite car? I mean, so the race car that I have right now, for Americans, it was the Lexus SC300. For people in the Japanese market and some places in Europe, it would have been the Toyota Soarer. In certain export markets, so it's a big sports coupe from the 90s. I mean, it's my favorite car in the sense that it's my race car right now, so that's why I like it. And the reason I got that car specifically was I was heavily involved in drifting when that sport started getting popular in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a guy in Japan who used one of these. His name was Ueno. he had a Soarer as his drift car in the big Japanese drift championship. So I was like, oh man, that thing's so cool! Like I'd love to have one someday. So that someday turned into eventually, and then I got one, and then I spent way too much money turning it into a mediocre race car. But yeah, so that's probably my favorite car right now.
Okay, cool, nice. Is there anything? Or what do I need to do to drive you crazy?
To drive me crazy?
Yeah.
Logical inconsistency, right? So, okay. and what I mean by that is when you're arguing a point or trying to have a difficult discussion, and your logic is inconsistent. Like it's like normally it's A therefore B, B therefore C, A therefore C. Like hey, correct. And when it's like, a cheeseburger, swimming pool, computer, and it's just like, what? Like, I don't, that's what drives me crazy, right? Where it's like the conversation is nonlinear, the person jumps all around, you try to argue something specific, and then they like make a general exception, and then they're like, okay, let's talk about the general exception, and then they focus on the specific, and you're just like, oh, I can't deal with this. So, those are the kind of things that drive me crazy. But it's also like a personal problem on my side because not everybody thinks very linearly or logically. So, a lot of the challenge, then is when I feel crazy, it's like, let me try to understand where they're coming from. Like, how are they feeling right now? Like, what is this because they're frustrated or what, And so I got to try to turn it around. But yeah, generally speaking, like that's what drives me crazy is people who are just like,
Erik, thank you very much for all these insights. Yeah, normally here at the end of this wonderful episode,
this or that,
we play one round of this or that. I think this or that is right in
one round.
One round, just one set of questions. So one
set of questions. Okay, not just like one question, because then I feel really pressure for.
So you normally you don't wear a fedora or?
I normally don't wear hats. I'm not really a hat person. That's not entirely true. Well, I do have a cowboy hat.
Okay.
So another funny story. So my ex-wife was very into horses. And I would go and I got a nice camera. I would take pictures of her. And, it's sunny outside. And so I was like, well, I want a hat that's like going to keep the sun off me. But, and then we ended up in Texas for watching a car race that was in Austin. And I was like, oh, we're in Texas. I need a cowboy hat. So I bought a cowboy hat. And then that became like my signature. So I would always wear my cowboy hat at the horse events. And then people were like, oh, the cowboy hat guy, like he takes good pictures. And then they started paying me for pictures. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll take money to take pictures. But anyway, so I guess that's the only hat that I might wear regularly, but it's been a minute. So.
Hey, it looks good. I mean, definitely. Okay, so if you're ready, then...
I am as ready as I'm going to be, since I'm not supposed to think.
Great. Then let us start with this or that. Erik, holidays in the Caribbean or camping in the mountains?
Caribbean.
Okay, logic or gut feeling?
Sorry, say again. Logic or gut feeling?
Yeah.
Logic.
Big city or small village?
Big city.
Basketball or golf?
Basketball.
Video games or tabletop games?
Video games. Can I say
Porsche? Yeah. Porsche 911 or Chevy Corvette C8? The
911.
Okay. Mozart or Metallica?
Metallica.
Walk the dog at 6 a.m. or cuddle the cat at midnight?
Walk the dog at 6 a.m.
Comedy or drama?
Comedy.
Cook or order?
Cook.
Java or Node.js?
Ugh, neither. Ruby.
And the last question, Mac or RHEL? Are you a Mac user or RHEL user, or both?
I'm a Fedora user, but yeah, I would prefer Linux to Mac.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
You're very
That was
welcome.
very interesting. Huh?
All right.
Really
It's perfect
cool.
timing because my headset's beeping that it wants to die. So.
Okay, great. No, I really appreciate that you took the time.
Thank you for
this.
honoring me with your first English language episode and for your first episode of season 2. So hopefully I bring you some luck maybe with expanding things, or at least I don't scare everybody away.
I don't think so. I think the content was really great, and yeah, thank you very much for the participation and all the great things you've said.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and,
thank you very much.
If people have questions, write them in the comments, and Ortwin can find me, and I'll try to do my best to answer them.
Exactly. And Erik, it is Friday. I wish you a very great week.
Later for you on Friday, but it's good for me, yeah. Make sure you subscribe to Ortwin's channel for more bottoms-up content.
Yeah, you could do that.
If you have anything negative to say, send it via private message. If you have anything awesome to say, make sure you put it in the comments.